And coming up on this week's show, railways and vegetation, bats, dormice, and biodiversity in general don't always mix well. Are we getting the balance wrong? The railway celebrates its 200th anniversary in style. And Rail Minister Lord Hendy wades in on the Eurostar competition. So welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and...
from me, Richard Bowker.
With a good old mix to dive into this week, Richard. So now one of the issues that gets talked about a really great deal and drives a fair amount of emotion is the question of vegetation control. I know I've got quite excited about it myself on occasions. On the line of the railway, and the question as to whether we have the balance right between environmental matters, species protection, and biodiversity management, with the fact that we also need to run a safe and reliable railway. Now, Dr. Neil Strong is the Biodiversity Strategy Manager for Network Rail, and he's very much in the front line of this debate. Richard had a chance to catch up with Neil recently to put some questions to him, including the trickier ones. Here's how it went.
Well, welcome to Green Signals, Neil. It's great to have you with us. I wonder if you could just start by just explaining what is the role of the Biodiversity Strategy Manager?
So my role sits within the technical authority at Network Rail. So you may have heard of the Power 6. So we have the 5 regions and then the technical authority providing the advice, the standards, the guidance to those regions so that they're able to manage whichever bit of the infrastructure that they're looking for. And from my side of things, the biodiversity, we've got nearly 40,000 hectares across our estate. There's 50-odd thousand hectares of the railway. About 40,000 of that is the important green stuff at the side. That's where a lot of the biodiversity sits, and that's where I'm trying to help the regions manage the legislation and manage the work that we have to do.
Got it. So, I mean, you've been involved right from the very outset. I know you started in the days when it was rail track.
Yes, yeah.
Only just, but nonetheless.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so you've seen a sort of a broad sweep of change. How much has biodiversity management and habitat management and vegetation management changed in Network Rail over that period?
It's changed massively. I mean, I was brought in as the first arboriculturalist in the business back in 2001. And so I was sat in track engineering at the time, putting together the standards for how we manage the vegetation to make sure the trains can do their thing down the middle. Biodiversity probably didn't even come into the conversations I was having with the head of track at the time. And since then, I think it's become more of a thing outside the fence, but also we've recognized that if we manage the biodiversity bit right, we can also do those train things. And actually the management we need to do to keep trains running safely and on time can actually fit with the same management that we need for the biodiversity. The opportunity we have, that we have legislation that asks us to protect and enhance the biodiversity. Well, we can do that whilst running trains.
Okay. I suppose, though, I mean, it's diving straight into something that will be considered perhaps a little controversial by some, but sort of common sense by others. If you look at these photographs of, those famous before and after photos of bits of railway in the 1920s or in the 1950s, and you look at them now, and in times past, they were immaculate. You had these sort of bowling green sort of embankments. There was not a weed or a shrub in sight. There was nothing between the boundary fence, just this immaculate railway. And then you look now, and oftentimes it can look very, very different. Do you think the pendulum has swung too much the wrong way?
I mean, the reason why all that vegetation has appeared is possibly one thing to get into. So you had the management of that estate as grassland to keep the risk from the fires that you would inevitably get from the steam trains. You have a grass fire, it's a cold fire. It moves through really quite quickly. Doesn't set fire to your embankment because there's lots of wood hanging around to burn, and the stuff that they made the embankments and the cuttings with, or the embankments with at the time, was probably slightly tricky, some of whatever they could get to fill in the holes almost. So if your whole embankment goes up in flames, then that's going to close your railway for a lot longer. So that cold fire was a good thing. You remove the steam trains out of the scenario, moving into the electrics and the diesels, you then have that reduced fire risk. There was then a perception that we didn't need to manage the trees as much, and all that vegetation that's on the line side has arrived by itself. We've planted very few trees on our side of the fence over the last 60, 70 years. And so it's all turned up through that natural regeneration. The point you make, though, is that what we're now seeing is a lot more impacts from that vegetation because it's a lot closer in places than it used to be. And so it's then that managing that balance. We don't need to go back to those Brunellian grassy slopes, but we need to manage that structure so that we can keep trains running safely, but we can also provide that opportunity and that support for that nature to live next to the railway, which it can do.
Right. So, because I take that point, but there are some parts of the railway where overhanging trees, which is a risk to striking trains. That's not great for drivers or the train, or the service. So we are saying that look, we don't need to go back to where we were, but we do need to be more proactive, I suppose, in our management of some of this vegetation, because in some places it's not where it should be.
Yeah, and it is a case of identifying those areas where it's most at risk, identifying the species or the particular trees that you have concern about. The challenge we have is you've got tubes of people moving up and down, you've got all the freight, and then you've got the access and the constraints of getting the teams that we've got and our contractors in safely to be able to do the work. Building all that together, doing it then at the right time of year so that you can avoid breaching any of the environmental legislation. That's the massive challenge of those planning to get in to do the work that we do need to do.
And that really is a challenge, isn't it? I was just, as you were just saying that, I was just reflecting on a visit I did to a site in on one part of the railway, probably better not say where ash dieback was a real concern, and it was affecting. These trees had to be removed because they were affecting sight lines. So there was a kind of a speed restriction on the line, and they couldn't get in because of I think the potential existence of dormice, and then they couldn't get in because of the issues around nesting birds. And the result was that for 6 years they actually hadn't, or 5 or 6 years, they hadn't got in. So the speed restriction was still there. And there was a bit of me went, okay, that doesn't feel to me like a balance.
It is a challenge. I think I know the location you're referring to, and it is, the legislation that protects the dormice and the nesting birds has been there, the nesting bird one since 1981. So, and before probably, is the same legislation. It has the same crest, depending on which year it was written, on the front of it, that the safety legislation does. So this is why we have to make sure that people like me, have to support those colleagues to help them make those decisions, make those, so that they're able to make the right balance between how do we get in. The ash dieback is a challenge. We know that they will be impacted. But if you have a tall ash tree next to the railway and it's within falling distance, you don't necessarily need to remove the ash tree completely. You can make it short enough so that if it did fall over in the future, it won't reach the railway. If it dies because it's killed by ash dieback, then the thing that you've left standing is a massive point of habitat for a bunch of species that would have lost it if you'd removed it completely. Similarly with nesting birds, they will nest in areas, and it's looking at when they're nesting, generally March to August. But if a bird wants to nest on Christmas Day, it's perfectly entitled to, and it is also protected. So it's picking the right time of year. If there's dormice in the area, there are times of the year when you're able to do work, even if there are dormice in the area, because they're more mobile. But it's how you do that work, the extent to which you do that work. And so creating the structure that dormice like is actually really good for being right next to the railway. They like the sort of the fruiting plants. They need hazel for the hazelnuts. They like they're an arboreal species. They like running around in a canopy. They don't like running around on the ground. So you need that habitat. And if you push that further away from the track, the habitat is still there for the dormice, and you've moved it further away. So your sight lines could be improved depending on whatever curvature you've got. So it's then the challenge is then what time of year can I go in? Can I go in now because of the birds, or is it the dormice are there? And there will be a time, Tuesday in September or something, that you're allowed to go in and do something because everything will be okay. And that's where we can work together to get that planning right. So we know there's dormice, we know there's nesting birds, we know which trees we need to deal with, we know where the sight line is. And maybe it's not remove everything, maybe it's bring the height down so you can see over the top of it. You've still retained that habitat there. It's slightly shorter than it was, but the species will be fine with that. That's the balance, is getting all those things in so that you can do both at the same time. And that's the key bit, is that we run trains and we do biodiversity.
So that's a very, very important point. And you've just mentioned the word planning there, which I think is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, the mood music does seem to be changing, and I know neither you nor I or anybody on the railway can double guess what might come out of Westminster, for instance.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be a movement. I mean, even the Chancellor said recently in a speech, I think it was early this year, she said she wanted businesses to focus on getting things built and stop worrying about the bats and the newts. That's a statement coming from somebody in a very senior leadership position, and that's going to kind of set the tone, really. Are you sort of a bit nervous now that with that kind of mood music, almost your job gets even harder rather than more straightforward?
It's at the moment, the legislation is still there to protect the bats and the newts. So what I've got to work at is making sure that colleagues don't think that they've heard what the Chancellor said and they can just crack on and do this thing. Because actually there's going to be somebody who's going to say, did you know that there's those things there? So
the law's the law till it's not the law.
Basically, yes. Yep. And so, again, with the newts, there are schemes in place. The Natural England has worked over the last few years to put together these things called district level licensing, which enables you to identify where you're going to do your piece of work. You're then able to pay a sum of money into almost a conservation fund that will be spent on improving habitat for the newts somewhere else, and it means you can just get on and do the work on your work site. What they identified was that a number of years ago, people were spending more money looking for the newts than they were actually trying to protect them, and they flipped it on its head, so that actually build the habitat, create the habitat, protect the habitat for the newts to go to, and then you can carry on and doing your building work or infrastructure development. Yeah. But it comes down to knowing that they were there in the first place. And you can do that in advance with the surveys that you need to do often to get through planning.
So good planning, it should solve most things. Right now, that's not. I've heard that refrain a number of times. So when Network Rail goes to do a piece of vegetation clearance or management or habitat protection, is there a sort of a set of objective criteria that are applied, which is some are operational, some are to do with species, some are perhaps even to do with flood protection or whatever. Is there a sort of a set of criteria that are applied to say, no, if you're going to go in like this and do this and plan for that?
There are criteria. I mean, at the moment, we need to focus. You've talked about a number of locations where the vegetation is certainly very leafy, I think is probably the best phrase at the moment. We know where we've got to be going, and it is those locations that we need to focus on to make sure that we've sorted out the safety and the performance bits.
Right.
When we are there doing that work, it comes back to what I was just saying before. You don't need to remove everything, because the structure of the habitat can work. If you've got trees that are all the way up to 3-5 meters from the line, you don't need to remove everything to the fence line that's 25 meters away.
Right.
You can remove the stuff that's within falling distance. You can shorten the trees so that they're no longer within falling distance. You can leave the habitat over there because it's not actually getting in the way, and actually it's possibly supporting the railway because it's stopping. There was a site in Anglia where they used the hedges to stop, or they planted hedges to stop the snowdrifts, which they experienced a number of years ago now. We've seen in Wales where they've had washouts of the railway, and they've looked at the side of the railway and they've seen that the washouts occurred where the gaps in the hedges are. So the more vegetation we're able to keep, some of the impacts we're getting from climate change and the adverse weather and more surface water runoff is actually going to be slowed down by the vegetation that you're able to retain. It doesn't have to be 25 meters tall trees that you're keeping. You can turn those trees into almost a long linear hedgerow, bit of a messy hedgerow. It's not going to be one of those ones you see at the farm competitions where it's been laid perfectly with that pleached bars across the top, but it's a bunch of stuff, to use a technical biological phrase, that creates your habitat. It creates a boundary to stop trespassers and livestock coming through, and it's out of the way of the trains. So by not removing everything, retaining the habitat, but in a safe way, you can do the train thing and you can do that biodiversity thing.
Look, one very sort of, I suppose, slightly flippant thing, but it's not that flippant really. I mean, buddleia.
Yeah.
I look at that on the railway, and there are places where it has become, it's almost, invasive, and it's lovely for the butterflies, and where it's growing on the ballast at the edge of the railway, fine, but where you see it sort of in brick parapets and on, it's that worries me that it's actually causing instability in the pointing and it's going to cause damage. Is buddleia one of those problems that we kind of wish we didn't have at all?
It's those Victorian plant hunters' fault, Richard. It's doing what it does in its home range back in the Himalayas. It's growing out of those rocky outcrops and on the ballasted area. I think those areas you see on the ground level stuff, it's in those difficult to get to triangles and points at the ends of junctions and things like that. It's not an excuse, but it is very difficult to get to. Definitely the stuff up in the brickwork is something that we have looked at over the years. Challenge again is getting something or somebody to the point where the buddleia are growing, safely. There is some work. We've got one of our suppliers has recently, I think, got approval to be able to spray herbicide from drones, and so that might help us to be able to start treating this at height safely. So again, it's using the technology that's coming in to be able to try and deal with this stuff.
That's really interesting, because my understanding, we can't use the sprays that we used to spray because the stuff gets into water courses and it's nasty stuff.
If you target it's perfectly fine.
It's okay and interesting. So drone technology could actually help that.
Yeah,
that's brilliant. That's fascinating.
And you mentioned sort of the butterflies like in buddleia. Again, yes, they do. The challenge, again, there's a bit of a strange challenge. This one is, at least they've got something to go and get the nectar from. They need that energy. The pollinators is a massive thing. Yeah. The challenge being that if they go into the buddleia, are they not going to a native plant and then pollinating that plant? So it's one of those weird juxtapositions that we have to just try and manage. But it's a challenge. We need to get on top of it in places, especially in those areas where we've got sites of special scientific interest, and you've got any invasive coming into those we need to be managing.
Brilliant. Well, look, it's a fascinating area. I think you've probably got one of the most interesting jobs in the railway that I've come across, and I found that really interesting. As you say, look, a lot of this comes down to good planning, as we know it always does. And there are bounces, and there are bits of legislation that we all have to comply with. So until they change, they haven't changed. Neil, thank you so much for your time. Good luck. And maybe as this sort of develops, and maybe as the planning regime develops, maybe come back and chat about this again. But for now,
more than happy to, Richard. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Cheers.
Thanks.
So, I have got quite excited about it in the past, Richard. I used to run a thing each year, which Stef will remember, called my BBW campaign, which is a bin, bag and weed killer on stop and examine, and readers would send into Rail all their pictures of tomatoes growing in the 4-foot at Peterborough and weeds and buddleia and rubbish and litter everywhere. So it's a long-running problem, isn't it? And you said yourself recently you felt it was getting out of control.
I think in some respects it is, or it has. And I found that it was a fascinating discussion with Neil. Could have talked to him for hours and hours, really. And I hope it's something we can actually come back to. I found some of his arguments very compelling, actually, and it was something that Ellie Burrows actually had picked up in the interview that we did with her about using vegetation and
trespass control.
For all sorts of things, preventing snow coming on the line and that kind of stuff. And so I completely get all that. And I think the point that he made, which I thought was really good, was actually, planning is critical. If you do things well ahead of the time and you've got a plan, that's kind of the key to everything. I still think there are examples of local decisions and issues. The bit I was talking about, the bit on the railway was at Brynny Gwyn, and when I went out with Nick Millington that time, and we looked at the sightline issue because of Ash Dieback.
6 years, wasn't it?
Something like that. I hope that's right. It was certainly a number of years. But so I think the general principles that Neil was espousing are very sound. It's how it gets implemented on the front line in every location where I think some issues do arise.
I guess I've got my sweet and sour responses to will be the sour one is that, it made it all sound all you need to do is plan it and it'll just happen. And it's subtle and varied and all the rest of it. My experience is that nothing happens for years, then they flatten the lot. There doesn't seem to be much subtlety about it at all. The one thing he'd said, which I really did like, and you picked up on it, was the idea of using drones to spray buddleia before it really gets all in embankment walls and cutting walls, because that is a real problem. So that I thought was a great idea.
It is. There's clearly some very good uses of technology, which they need to. What the bit that is going to be really interesting, I thought he was very diplomatic, as he has to be, when I asked him about what the Chancellor had said about
bats and
don't worry quite so much about the bats in the news. The law is what it is today. We all accept that. And as Mark Wilde said at the Transport Select Committee when asked about the bat tunnel, he said, "Well, I can't apologise for complying with the law."
No.
Right? But you do sense there is a movement to build baby Bill or build or whatever it is. And that could have some significant implications. And what you hope is that the pendulum, we don't find itself swinging too dramatically in another direction, because balance is key.
But that's the thing about pendulums, isn't it? They swing.
They do swing.
Right, we'll keep our eye on that, and we'll move on to something properly uplifting. And that is a celebration of the 200th anniversary of the modern railway, as represented by the opening of the Stockton and Darlington Railway on September the 27th, 1825. And I can see by the look on your face, you're bursting to say something.
I'm just wondering,
you're going to argue, aren't you?
Was it the 200th anniversary?
Oh, I knew you were going. Well, you can go back to the 1600s and even Roman times on various forms of railways. But I think the thing about the S&D was it was the world's first public railway operated by steam locomotives, and that was regarded as a ground zero. The first passenger railway, of course, 5 years later in 1830 with the L&M. So we can do it all again then. With the rocket.
I totally agree.
With
by
a
the
rocket,
way.
rocket. I could just see him moving up to the microphone and waiting for me to draw breath.
Yeah.
But it's a debate that's been had on countless line sites.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was for the purposes of everybody else in the country, and it did well on the telly. Let's be fair about that.
Very well.
The railway for once was being celebrated and applauded in the northeast, and there were stacks of events taking place up and down the country, with perhaps the most eye-catching being the recreation of the run of Locomotion No. 1. That's the replica built in 1975 by the late Mike Sato, from Shildon to Darlington and then on to Stockton, including a remarkable image of it crossing and recrossing several times, it says. The Skern Bridge in Darlington, built in 1825 for the Stockton and Darlington Railway, it carried the first train on the opening day, September 27th, and it's still in use, making it the oldest railway bridge in continuous use in the world, which is remarkable. And if you ever travelled on that line, Richard, it's built to a very tight loading gauge. The DMUs seem to squeeze under the overbridges because, they didn't know how big trains were going to be, and they're just big enough. Anyway, Richard caught up with Steve Davis, MBE, chairman of the A1 Steam Locomotive Trust, who was one of the driving forces behind the reenactment of Locomotion No. 1's famous trip. and who was lucky enough indeed, to be on the anniversary train itself.
Steve, welcome. Have you come down yet? It must have been quite the weekend.
Well, I've slept solidly for 2 nights now, and woken up this morning still with this big buzz in my head at this extraordinary thing that we've achieved.
And I've seen some pictures. Obviously, there's been a lot of them doing the rounds, and extraordinary is almost doesn't do it justice, does it? Just give us a sense of what happened over this weekend. I mean, as quick as you can. Just give us sort of the broad sweep. What went on?
Well, what happened over these 3 days was extraordinary. And I got to make a plug early on that without Network Rail's wholehearted support, this would not have happened. They were incredible from the very top to the moms on the ground, the middle management, the senior management. They all came together, and I think they recognised that this was a celebration of their history as well as the rest of the industry. But what happened was on the Friday, we steamed from Shildon to Darlington. And at the end of that 8 miles, I thought, what the hell have we just done? And we've got more to come. Yeah, it was incredible. It was a ribbon of people for that 8 miles. We then went on shed, as it were, at the A1 Trust location, the brand new facilities we've got with the mainline connection. Stayed overnight. The next morning, we ventured onto Skerne Bridge to mark the actual 27th. A few run pasts on there. Thousands of people. I mean, just astonishing. The people made it as much as the engine.
Yeah.
We then went back on shed, and then we waited until midnight. And at midnight, the real excitement started. We ventured out onto the Bishop Auckland branch, went on to Skerne Bridge, sat there for about 25, 30 minutes, which was all floodlit. There were thousands down there again. And then the moment. We set off to North Junction and steamed under the wires. And again, the hairs are standing on the back of my neck now, not from the electricity, but from the memory of it. And then we steamed into Darlington Banktop Station to a big reception, and an LNER Azuma unit named Darlington was there, and we had this fantastic photo call there. Then after that, we had this expedition through the night that took us via Dinsdale. Crowds are out there. Then we stayed there for a couple of hours. Then we went to Eagles Cliff, and people are out and about at the early hours of the morning. Sat in Eagles Cliff Loop, and then we steamed on into Stockton to a major civic reception. But it wasn't all over with. After that, we had to get to Ferry Hill, but via another viewing area where the Royal Artillery were there firing like 105 light guns in tribute, in salute. And eventually, after a fairly lengthy series of climbs, we came into Ferry Hill to be loaded onto trucks. A total of 41 miles.
Wow.
Faultlessly performed by that magnificent engine. I got a magnificent support crew. It was a massive team effort, and it went faultlessly. And that is down to clinically detailed planning from 2.5 years ago. This didn't start recently. We started 2.5 years ago. And in the last few weeks, the whole thing gelled. And
where do you test something like this, Steve? Because I presume that the first run was not on the Friday.
No, actually the testing regime was for 4 months.
Wow.
We had booked the Weardale Railway. They were delighted to host us. We had a pit road in their shed at Walsingham to ourselves. And we tested and tested and tested. And that was critically important because in the early stages, although the engine had a major overhaul at Locomotive Maintenance Services in Loughborough, it was overhauled to the specification it was when ownership was transferred from Beamish to Darlington. What quickly became apparent was it didn't have the guts. We were losing steam after a mere mile. And there was a point at which I was in despair. Piglet came to see us from the North Yorkshire Moors Railway. He said, have you tried briquettes? I said, I'll try anything. So the next morning he turns up with a ton, and we never looked back because the draft through the tubes was so weak that conventional coal was furring up the tubes badly, and heat transfer was being hugely impacted. But these eco briquettes, as they're called, which are compressed coal, not charcoal, they burn very hot and virtually smokeless. And I say it just transformed from that point onwards. But we weren't content with that. We had to make major improvements to the draftings. So outwardly, the engine it doesn't look any different, but inwardly there are some incredible simple modifications. One of which, the chimney is 17 inches wide. We inserted a 10-inch wide stainless steel flue down the middle of it. That had an immediate impact of drawing the fire. And secondly, we reduced the blast pipe with a choke from 3 inches to 2.5 inches. That had an impact as well. During the overhaul, it had been fitted with a blower for the first time, but we also added onto it a compressed air blower for steam raising first thing in the morning. And the combination of flue, blast pipe, blower, and eco coal, to use that phrase, magnificent. It just goes now. And at the beginning, we wouldn't have done a mile. On the day, we did 41 miles. Faultlessly.
41 miles. How fantastic. I suppose the sort of big question is why? Why do it? I mean, it's a lot of, it's taken all that planning. It will not have been cheap. An awful lot of people had to probably sort of do things in a way that it was not in their normal job. Why do it, Steve?
Well, first and foremost, it's because we're British. We do these things. We're mad. It's like, why climb Everest? But secondly, and this is the more serious point, there is no doubt that 200 years of rail history is an important milestone, and it started here in this country. I was trying to work out why people were turning out in such large numbers, and I thought they're after a good news story. There's a lot of people aren't enjoying the national climate at the moment. That's perhaps too political an observation, but you know the point I'm making. And all of a sudden, here was something that was apolitical, that everybody could get behind, and it was an amazing spectacle. Those stood by the trackside would have seen the train come past for probably 30 seconds, but they took the trouble to go out and enjoy that 30 seconds. And as I say, I would hate to say it's a dress rehearsal for 2030. I think the question is, given the effort that was required to mount this, does the industry have the appetite for a rerun? Because 2030 is a big one, Liverpool and Manchester. But on the other hand, I think that significant lessons have been learnt from the delivery of this to make the delivery of 2030 probably a bit more efficient, because we had our ups and downs on the way with this, but nevertheless a grim determination to make it happen. And my own attitude is, if I say it's going to happen, it will happen. And the more that people say it won't happen, the more it guarantees it will happen. So it was great. It was a 3-day fix, a 3-day high, but I think the international coverage that it got, which is significant, will be beneficial to UK PLC as well.
Well, look, I agree. You've undoubtedly captured the hearts and minds of tens of thousands of people. It's been an amazing team effort. Every team needs a great leader, Steve, though. So congratulations on pulling it off, everybody involved. And I think we can all agree it would be absolutely marvellous to see it all done again in 2030. So fingers crossed. But for now, congratulations and thanks for joining us.
Many thanks. Many thanks.
There's not many things, Richard. I think, oh God, I really would have liked to have been on that, but that was it. And I actually tweeted that day that locomotive crew, Chris Cubitt drove it. I think they were the luckiest locomotive crew, not only in the country but actually in the world that day. To be doing that is just astonishing. There were tourists from Japan and all over the place.
He said, didn't he, Steve? Literally. The only thing that changed about the crowd was it got a bit thinner and a bit thicker in places, but it was virtually continuous. I mean, absolutely extraordinary. He said, I think he tweeted a lovely thing on the day. He said, "My goosebumps have got goosebumps."
Yeah.
He said it's just an extraordinary experience.
I heard him use the expression "a ribbon of people."
Yeah, a ribbon of people. Yeah,
and he's right about that. But what a thing to have been part of! And to see that grasshopper motion, hissing, clanking thing on the East Coast main line. I mean, Lion was the thing from 1980, wasn't it, on the main line? And that image is just astonishing.
Yeah.
Right, we can look forward to 2030 and doing it all again with Rocket now, can't we? Meanwhile, back to this year's celebrations, and as mentioned earlier, there were many events taking place around the country, and Richard managed to unleash his inner spotter to attend a rather different one run by South Eastern Railway, a networker tour around South London and North Kent. With his Stuart Baker Rail Atlas clutched in his hand, he went off on the trip, and here's a short film.
Well, it's Saturday, the 27th of September 2025. That's the official date for the 200th anniversary of Britain's railway. And I've come to London Victoria to celebrate the anniversary on a rather special train. The train in question is a Class 465 four-car networker electric multiple unit. This particular unit is number 465908 and was built by Metro Camel in Birmingham. Recently and beautifully repainted by South Eastern in its iconic Network South East livery, it has been named Chris Green OBE in honour of the legendary former British Rail Managing Director who was the architect of Network South East. It's only fitting that the great man himself was on board to join in the fun. Tickets for this particular rail tour, a 3-hour land cruise from Victoria to Brixton, Beckenham, Bromley South and Orpington, before reversing and coming back via Hither Green, Sidcup, Abbey Wood, Woolwich, Charlton, and then non-stop through London Bridge before arriving at Cannon Street, sold out in 24 hours. With everything in good order and period uniforms on display to add to the sense of history, we show our tickets and board the train before departing promptly at 10 o'clock. Our first treat is passing by Stewart's Lane Depot, a fairly rare bit of track. After a brief stop at Kent House to let a train past, we have a spirited run through Beckenham Junction and Bromley South before arriving at Orpington. We're about a third of the way through the tour here. We have to change direction to head back up to Chislehurst and then through to go to Woolwich and back to Cannon Street. So it's a bit of a chance to stretch our legs and take the obligatory photograph. As I take in the scene, I note the rather bemused glances of the passengers waiting on the adjacent platform, wondering what on earth is causing so many people to want to take photograph after photograph of such an ordinary-looking train. Back on the move, and we hear a curious announcement. Please close all the windows as we are about to pass through Grove Park Carriage Wash. I can honestly say this is the first time I've been through a carriage wash on a rail tour. Slightly disappointingly, the wash isn't actually working, although I suppose there's always a risk that someone did leave a window open. Just north of Grove Park, we turn right to traverse a very rare piece of track, well, for passenger trains at least, the curve from Lee Spur Junction to Lee Loop Junction. Once we're off the curve and back on the main line to Sidcup, I asked Chris about Network South East and its enduring legacy. So Chris, 40 years nearly Network South East. Can you believe that it's kind of lasted as in people's memories with such fondness as long as it has?
No, it feels like yesterday to all of us, I think. We can all remember what we were doing on the 10th of June 1986. That was the launch day, and from then onwards it was just frenetic. It was fun, and everyone joined in enthusiastically.
And yet, the memories do linger. Who would have thought in 1986 that one day we'd be on a rail tour, riding around on a networker in South London?
I can't believe the units have already done 40 years. It's quite remarkable. And you think how many miles they've done and how many people they've carried. I think we shall miss them.
There's a hard left at Perry Street Fork Junction by Slade Green Depot, and then we're heading back up towards Abbey Wood. The train is well loaded, and everyone is clearly having a great time. I asked two of our fellow passengers, Mark and Dythe, what had prompted them to come on a trip such as this. So I'm here with Mark and Dythe. Mark, I understand you're the reason that you came on this trip today, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. I saw the advert for it and thought, that brings back memories of when I was younger. I thought, yeah, why not go for it?
And what were those memories? Were you a rail enthusiast in the past?
Sadly, the closest I ever got was working for the Department for Transport. That's as close as my fame got.
Fantastic. And Dave, you got dragged along as well.
Well, he normally sees the tours and he says, do you want to go on a tour? And I'll say yes. And he books them and then we turn up. And I've always been an enthusiast since I was knee-high to a foot.
Mark, has it brought back those memories?
It has. It's been an absolutely amazing day. Lovely reliving it.
After passing through Mount Street Tunnel, we crossed Charlton Lane Level Crossing, which I am reliably informed is the staffed crossing box that is closest to the centre of London. Soon we're through Greenwich and a glimpse of the Docklands Light Railway. We pass over Deptford Creek. Then high above the East London line, now renamed the Windrush line. And then along the Arrow Strait section of the former London and Greenwich Railway, opened between 1836 and 1838, it was the first steam railway in the capital, the first to be built specifically for passengers, and the first entirely elevated railway. It's still something of a marvel today. We pass through London Bridge non-stop, something I'm not sure I've ever done before. So we've just gone through London Bridge non-stop, which is pretty unusual actually. Can't think of many trains that do that. We're very shortly to arrive at London Cannon Street and the end of the tour. The Friends of Network South East, an enthusiastic charity committed to celebrating, protecting and preserving the rich story of Network South East, have a lovely merchandising table set up at Cannon Street. And South Eastern have raised nearly £10,000 from ticket sales for the Railway 200 charities. Who best to help present the cheque than the man who started Network South East in the first place? Well done to South Eastern and the Friends of Network South East for a rail tour with a difference, but one that was clearly enjoyed by everyone on board and provided the perfect way to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the modern railway in Britain.
Well, that looked a very friendly, happy gathering, to see all that lot, and you and Chris Green sat there with your rail atlases.
Do you know, there was a moment when I suddenly thought, everybody's going to have their rail atlases out looking at, interesting bits of track. And I think it was basically Chris and me. So I don't know who were the biggest train spotters on the train. It was fantastic. It was really well organised. Great idea from South Eastern and brilliant atmosphere on the day. There were sort of authentic period uniforms, lots of British rail uniforms. Yeah. Well, there was a guy with the Southern Railway one, but there was quite a few from the 80s and the early 90s. It was just a really nice atmosphere. And for some people, the first time they'd actually done a little rail tour like that. So it was really cool.
And didn't the train look good?
It was absolutely immaculate. I mean, honestly, immaculate. And I think it's a hand-painted job. It looks stunning. And great.
So well done to Steve White and his team for smiling benevolently on that one. And hasn't the railway made a lot of interesting things happen?
Oh, superb. I mean, we could go on and talk about dozens and dozens of events. We've just talked about two, but it really did make it happen on the day. Well done.
Earlier in the year, when I think Hendy told you about Rail Tour, I thought, is this going to work, all these events? But they absolutely have.
Really have.
Thanks to the collaboration by the industry, and particularly Network Rail, let's be honest, because they've really bent over backwards. So well done, Andrew Haynes, in your last year and the entire team. Now, one of the most popular guests we've had on the show in the whole 2 years we've been doing Green Signals, and it is 2 years next month, was John Worth on episode 99 a month or so ago. We were flooded, we really were, with delighted comments, from me as well, from people who felt that John had demystified all manner of issues, and there was a clamour for more. So I'm delighted to say that John will be coming back on the show once ORR has published its decision on who, if anyone, can have access to Temple Mills International Depot, which is currently planned for October 31st. In the meantime, though, ministers have been making their views known. Fancy that. With regards to the use of Ebbsfleet and Ashford international stations in Kent. Ghost stations, you could say. The Guardian newspaper reported on Friday, September 26, that Rail Minister Lord Hendy had made written representations to the independent regulator, the ORR, to make clear our support for competition and the benefits this brings, including the potential for services to be reinstated at Kent stations. The Telegraph went further, suggesting that Lord Hendy had said the potential for services to be reinstated in the county would be a factor in choosing a new entrant. That puts pressure on both Virgin and Evelyn, whose current plans do not include stopping at either Ebbsfleet or Ashford. Richard, you've been keeping your finger on the pulse of this one. Is this intervention something of interest?
Well, yes, it is, because of the timing, I suspect, more than anything else. The speech is quite recent, as you said, but the letter referred to is actually rather less recent, because we presume that the newspapers were referring to a letter that Lord Hendy sent to the ORR on the 17th of July as part of the ORR's request for submissions related to the whole issue, right?
Okay.
And in that letter, the minister says this. It says the government agrees that in reaching a decision, several of the ORR's statutory duties, including those normally used to determine network capacity, are relevant here, albeit I recognise these require careful weighing to reach a decision. So that's an interesting point.
Very diplomatic.
He realises that it's not just one issue. He then goes on to list a couple of the duties he considers relevant, and then he says this. The government firmly believes that the arrival of competition will benefit users of international rail services by expanding the number of stations served, including new markets, encouraging greater differentiation in service provision, and promoting competitive prices, all standard stuff, right?
Hooray.
For example, the government strongly welcomes the fact that several new entrants are exploring the possibility of serving variously the currently unused Stratford, Ebbsfleet and Ashford international stations. The government believes these are important considerations for ORR in determining the various access applications, noting the interplay with the relevant duties outlined above.
Now, isn't that interesting?
Well, it's very cleverly written.
Isn't
it's
it?
very carefully written.
Well, he can't be seen to be telling the regulator what to do, can he?
Well, no, but he can make his point, and I think he makes it pretty clearly. I mean, when he says several new entrants, that's interesting, because not all the new entrants are considering things in the same way. So, I think Gemini have said that they will stop at Ebbsfleet, and they're certainly planning to use Stratford International as their launching point. Virgin said in their submission, because I went back and checked this, there's a lot of redacted stuff in this section, but it says, Virgin's ambition extends beyond its initial launch plans. It is actively engaging with stakeholders to explore future expansion, including Stratford, Ashford and Ebbsfleet stations, and is in dialogue with MPs and local councils. Or in other words, that's not what we're starting with, but we keep the door open for the future. So the minister's being very careful here. He is playing politics, right? He wants the good citizens of Ashford and Ebbsfleet and Kent to think that he's on their side. But equally, he knows, as you've just said, he can't direct the ORR what to do.
Sorry, I didn't mean to shoot you, Fox.
No, but you're right. And he's also, I suspect, got to be careful not to set himself up for judicial review if a bidder or a potential entrant feels that the ORR perhaps put more took more notice of what the minister said because of a political intervention, and therefore made a decision that they might not have done if he hadn't done it, right? If I haven't confused you. Now, still, the ORR decision's pretty imminent, so Lord Hendy was taking the opportunity just to remind the ORR, I think, that very publicly in what he told them back in July. We'll wait and see what the ORR decide to do, but I think it could get sort of quite interesting yet. But he cannot direct them. No. As he said, they've got to weigh up all the views.
They are an independent
in arriving at their decision. It'll be interesting to see what they do decide.
When St Pancras International opened in 2007, November, I think it was that year, fantastic ceremony. But Guillaume Pepe did the rounds making speeches in which some of the things he said have really stuck in my mind and have proved controversial over the years, one of which was bill for 400 kph, so you're building, modernisation in. But one of the things I remember him saying, he said, resist the temptation at all costs to be persuaded by political arguments to build stations you don't need along the routes, which will, then end up disused. And that's exactly what happened with Ashford and Ebbsfleet, and indeed Stratford International to a degree. They were built for political reasons and aren't being used.
Plenty of examples in France where there are stations in the middle of absolutely nowhere that aren't really used, but they're there kind of to keep the local the local mayor happy. So he knew what he was talking about. It will be interesting to see what comes out of this, because the money is in London, Paris, London, Brussels.
Of course it is.
Let's be absolutely clear. And this is a commercial market.
It's the same as London, Edinburgh, and London, Manchester. The money's not in Retford and Grantham and Milton Keynes.
Oh, don't go there again.
It's the same principle, isn't it? Intermediate stations, however you dress it up, that's what it is. Anyway, and now it's time to thank everyone who supports us. Thanks to RIA, first of all, the Railway Industry Association, our programme supporter, and to Rail Business Daily, our media supporter. Thanks very much. But a big thank you also to the individuals who have been kind enough yet again to leave us super thanks on YouTube this week, and you all are. Mike Heinsohn Evans, Richard R., Chris Exley, Keith Grafton, Alan Kirkman, John Kirkman, Maxstar 2010, Bob Walsh, Callum Thornellow, Richard Wenner and Graham Whitley, Alistair Rutledge, David Bell, Nigel Mapston, and the good old independent Brigline Rail Group. We really do appreciate so many of you leaving these super thanks, and I'm always conscious it sounds like we're just repeating it by rote, and we really aren't. The three of us are incredibly grateful for the help you give us, because it really does play a big part in producing the show. Thank you.
It does indeed. Thank you. And thanks also to our new gold and silver members, who are Patrick Bell Sr., Kevin Wilkes, Richard Colby, and Alan Johnson. You can see all our supporters, all our members at the end of the show in the credits. We list everybody because it does really matter to us. Now, just before we move on, Nigel, just a quick shout out to Ian Atkins. It was his birthday on September the 30th, and his wife Karen wrote to us to say that she and her husband listened to the show from their home in Trinidad. She told us his birthday was coming up, and so we're delighted to say happy birthday, Ian. We hope you had a great day celebrating.
And I'm sure those celebrations included some exotic cocktails with a nice rum punch or something Caribbean.
Well, who knows, but it certainly includes listening to Green Signal, so that's great. Yeah.
Thanks, Ian. And what do we say? And Karen, we do appreciate you reaching out, because we do appreciate our listeners and viewers wherever they are. And the Caribbean sounds a bit good. Could just do a holiday in Tobago, but we'll not get into that. And now it's time for this week's Railway News Roundup. We get to start with some good news this week, Richard. Huddersfield Station, that wonderful structure, has reopened after 30 days of major upgrade work as part of the Transpennine route upgrade. The first passenger train arrived at the newly rebuilt platforms on Monday, September 29th, after, now wait for it, 2,390 metres of track have been laid, 13,500 rail replacement buses have run, 3,000 trains have been carried on diversionary routes, 4 bridges have been installed, and 658 metres of new drainage have been constructed, all in 30 days. Well done them. And I just wonder how much distance those buses would have taken if they'd all been put end to end. But never mind. The station is operating with a temporary layout using platforms 1, 2 and 3, while phase 2 of the work continues behind new barriers. The remaining platforms, canopy restoration, track work and signalling enhancements will take place over the next 2 years, with plans to complete the station upgrade in early 2027. Now, right next door to the station, there's that huge old goods warehouse, isn't there? On the corner of which there was a wagon lift. I do hope that survived. Anyway, there we go. That's just me ruminating.
Well, thanks to Paul at the Independent Brigline Rail Group for spotting this one, as well as Giles Perkins, who dropped us a line, who's trustee of the Linton and Barnstaple Railway. 5 heritage railway stations and 2 other railway sites have been made Grade 2 listed by the Department of Culture, Media and Sport this week on the advice of Historic England, and it's to mark Railway 200. They include the Cleveland Bay, which is the earliest, I didn't know this, was the earliest identified railway pub in the world.
I think we should go.
Well, absolutely. I think we should, of course, up on Stockton Darlington Railway. Weybourne and Sheringham stations on the Norfolk Railway. Haven Street Railway Station on the Isle of Wight. Woody Bay Station on the Linton and Barnstaple in Devon. Swanage Engine Shed and Turntable, and Northbrook Road Overbridge. So that's terrific. I mean, I suppose you've got to ask the question, is grade 2 listing a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's a thing, really. I think what it does do is it kind of really cements for those places, particularly in their local context, how important they are. And you take something like the Linton and Barnstaple Railway, they're trying to recreate that railway, extend it, reopen it if they can. And that gives, the listing gives it a real kind of boost, because it basically says this is important stuff. So, look, it's tremendous. And in Railway 200, I think it was a really nice thing to have done.
It is. And I've never been to the Linton Barn, so I must put that right. But Woody Bay looks glorious. But listing, there's two aspects to it, isn't it? From a community point of view, there's everything that you've just said. From a personal point of view, everybody I know who's ever owned a grade 2 listed building says it's a real pain, because you have to do things a certain way. You can't replace windows. You can't do anything to modern equivalent. It all has to fit, and it has all got extra costs, which you have to meet, I think.
Yeah, I have to say it. So I've owned a couple of grade 2 listed houses, and I never found that problem. And it's a bit back to what we were saying with Neil Strong and Biodiversity, which is early engagement, communication, planning. If you set out trying to go, they're just trying to stop me, I'm going to go and find a way around it, then you will have issues. We never found that.
Okay.
Maybe we're lucky with the planning officers and the conservation officers that we had. But grade 2 is grade 2 star, and grade 1 is a slightly different kettle of fish. I think with grade 2, as long as you go about it in the right way, it's not.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You can't put UPVC windows or anything in, And
I think the point for these railway stations is quite interesting. They wouldn't want to do that anyway. I mean, the whole point is conservation and preservation of something as it was. So, look, there are some difficult stories, but I think by and large, for historical assets like this, it's actually. Okay. I think it's a positive thing. It preserves, it says these have a status that is worth keeping.
And let us not forget, listing is very powerful. That emergency grade 1 listing for St Pancras stopped BR flat in it.
Well, there you go. So it's a good thing.
It is a good thing. It is a good thing. Bit of a sad one now. Thanks to Darren P. Chilvers, Tim Pape, and Richard Kerwin for this one. Now, many green signallers will have heard of the Chilworth Chicken, or Jessie's Seat, as it was known, which is a topiary memorial on the North Downs line between Chilworth and Gomsall. It was in memory of a guard, Henry Wicks, who died in 1892 when the goods train he was travelling in was involved in a crash near the site. It was apparently well known and loved locally, note the past tense, you can see where we're heading here, and more widely, in fact. Unfortunately, Jessie's Seat was accidentally felled by a Network Rail contractor working on the line. Because it had lost its shape, they mistook it for a shrub and removed it for safety reasons, because it was blocking signs that remind drivers to sound their horns near the crossings. Network Rail has said they're working with the contractor, Coombs, to replant the memorial in a safer, more visible location, and will also be installing a plaque to honour its historic and local importance. I mean, we don't want an accidental Sycamore Gap loss, do we? So well done to Network Rail for acting quickly on that one.
Yeah, they put their hands up, and I think they've done the right thing.
They have.
Yeah,
and there's never a wrong time to do the right thing, Richard, is there?
Well, that is true. Talking of which, thanks to Jamie Edwards for sending us this one. Now, C2C has announced it has scrapped the 40% discount offer it had on off-peak tickets purchased 3 or more days in advance of travel. The offer ended on September the 30th, and they were certainly still advertising it prominently on the website up until then. So it does seem like it was actually quite a selling point, right? They were promoting it. Now, C2C hasn't said publicly why they've stopped doing this, but they've replaced the ticket with a third off saver ticket instead, which they claim is similar.
Even my math says no, it ain't.
Well, it's not just the fact that 33% and 40% are clearly not the same thing. There's a bit more than that, because they state this new ticket is only available on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, whereas the online advance discount that they've just got rid of was available any day. And you can't use the new one in conjunction with a rail card, whereas you could with the previous one. So quite how that is the similar product is a bit beyond beyond us, really. We asked C2C to comment on this change, and they gave a pretty sort of bland answer, really, about their commitment to valuing customers and recognizing it'll be disappointing news and so on and so forth. But I'm afraid I can't really. I don't think there's any escaping the fact that these new tickets are a worse deal. And one of the things we'll pick up next week was it was too late really to put in the show this week. Nigel, was GWR have just put up the price of certain tickets on the Thames Valley by a whopping 10%. And it's a weird thing because it all relates to commuter baskets. And if you split ticket at Didcot, because that's not part of it, you can. It's all a bit complicated, which is why when you look at it, but 10%, and you kind of go, wow. GWR saying it's a very, very small percentage of the total number of tickets sold. Okay, probably, I'm sure that's correct.
Not if you buy one every day, it's not.
Well, I just feel there's a kind of, there's some big changes happening all the time in terms of the cost of travel, and it is something that just needs to be flagged up. But yeah, that's the C2C one. Sorry, guys, it's not the same product, is it?
Maybe my cynical journalist brain is just saying it was too popular, too many people, the old Hoover thing, oversubscription by an eager market, and they were losing too much, so I've stopped it. Would that be an unfair view?
Well, who knows? I'm sure we will be. Somebody will tell us in due course. Yeah.
Right. Thanks to John Kirkman, our old friend, for sending us this one, which is definitely one we need to find out more about, Richard. Northern is using a new technique in the fight against leaf fall this year. Dry ice. Yep, they're trialling a new technology which involves a retired Class 142 pacer that has been fitted with cryogenic cleaning equipment, which sounds very Star Trek to me, known as cryo grip. Fallen leaves are blasted off the rails with dry ice pellets at supersonic speed. The frozen carbon dioxide pellets then thaw and become CO2 gas. The pacer is currently running between Bishop Auckland and North Road using spare paths, but if the trial is successful, the technology could be used on trains carrying passengers in the future. Cryogrip has apparently been tested before on the Wensleydale Railway. And just before we go, we mentioned in a previous programme that we'd be pursuing reform for a comment on some of the stuff we've been talking about, their transport policy. We'd made one attempt and got nowhere. Stef made another attempt, and guess what? Got nowhere. They're just not coming back to us. But we asked, as we said we would. And that is the news roundup for this week. If you'd like to send us any snippets of news or big stories from around you or more widely, please send them to us. We'd rather be told 3 times or more than not at all. And if we use your clipping, we'll give you a name check when we read it out. Can't say fairer than that. So please send them to news@greensignals.org.
Indeed. Which means it's time to do the quiz.
Yeah.
Now, last week's question was this. Who or what was the innominate Brit?
The what? Easy for you to say.
The innominate, i.e., of course, something without a name, right? And the answer was Britannia class locomotive number 70047, because all the Britannias were named apart from 70047. So it was the innominate Brit. There you go. Loads and loads of people. I mean, I just thought, yeah, that's a bit niche. No. There were loads of people who knew. And the winner, randomly chosen from all the correct answers we had, was Tim Fairbrother. So well done, Tim. If you could send us another email to quiz@greensignals.org with your address, I'll get your mug out to you. I'm pretty much up to date now. Load of mugs went out yesterday. So yeah, if you can send us your address, we can get that out. Apparently, Nigel, you're much more of a steam buff and knowledgeable than I am. I think one listener sent us a note saying that a number of patterns had been found for potential names, but they were never cast. So I wonder what the reason was why that one was never named, but it wasn't. So there you go.
Andrew Dow's father, George, was responsible for naming all the Brits, and I think Andrew wrote about it somewhere. Somebody will maybe tell us. Yeah, they had to be. Do you know what euphonious means? That's another good word. It means they have to sound good.
Yeah.
But when I was editing Steam Railway back in the early part of the 12th century, we actually ran a competition to name the unnamed Brit, and to my embarrassment, I can't remember what won it now. but the Duke of Wellington rings a bell, but I'm sure no. But we actually had the nameplates, and it ran on it, and it ran a train from Victoria, and Dick Hardy came along, and it was all great fun.
There you go. All right. Well, yeah, there we go. Anyway, to this week's quiz, and it's a reader question. Now, I think this is quite niche, but I really liked it. So thank you to Peter Muggeridge for this one.
Old mate Peter.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. This. Where on Britain's railway can you find station information signs in Latin? There you go. I thought that was really good. So if you think you know the answer to that, please send us an email to quiz@greensignals.org by midday Saturday, October 4th. We'll put all the correct answers in a hat and select a winner at random who will get one of our quiz winners mugs.
That seems so weird and distinctive. I feel I ought to know, but I have no idea, as usual.
Station information signs that are in Latin. There you go.
Right, so here's a positive ending now to a sad story, excuse me, that was sent in by Tom King. Now, in May last year, a fire was started in a railway carriage housing the model railway at the Bowness and Kinneil Railway. And last week, Daniel Roger, 33, admitted to starting the fire. Stirling Sheriff Court, having heard that he was heavily under the influence of drugs. The fire caused £100,000 worth of damage, and the model railway was forced to close for 11 months. Daniel Roger was jailed for 2.5 years for starting the fire, and another man, Keith Walker, who admitted to stealing model trains worth £5,000 and 2 vacuum cleaners, has been sentenced to 300 hours of unpaid work and placed under supervision for 2 years. Quarai 2. Insurers met £30,000 of the damage, and a further £35,000 was raised by crowdfunding. How about that? The Scottish Railway Preservation Society has put in a huge amount of work to restore the site, and I'm delighted to say that it's now fully operational once again, just showing how heritage railway people are always good, but absolutely at the best when the backs are against the wall.
Yeah, well done them. It's fantastic to see that operational again.
I'd have made it 5 years myself, but there you go. Anyway, and sadly, that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Green Signals channel on YouTube. It doesn't cost you a thing. Just click the button. But if you really want to support us, find out about Green Signals membership on YouTube or Patreon. But most importantly, please join Richard and I again next week for this show, which will always be free on a Thursday at noon. And we'll see you then. Until then, it's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from me.
Have a fantastic week.